The fog came in off Casco Bay at sunset and never left. By 2:53 in the morning, it had swallowed the harbor whole. That was when my security camera caught him. My son-in-law, inside my boatyard loft, a silver flashlight in one hand, going through my desk with the patience of a man who believed no one was watching. I was watching. From 50 yards away, inside the wheelhouse of the first boat I ever built. I did not call the police. I had something better planned. Before we begin, I am genuinely grateful you are here. Drop a comment and tell me what city or country you are watching from. I read every single one. A small note. This story contains fictional elements woven in for storytelling and educational purposes. Any similarity to actual names or places is coincidental. But everything it is trying to teach you is worth keeping. It was November of 2023, and I had not slept in 3 nights. Not because I could not. I want to make that clear. A man who has bent oak ribs into hull frames by hand in an unheated boatyard since 1978 learns to sleep anywhere. On a cot beside a half-planked skiff. In the cab of a truck at a marine supply lot in Bath because the order came in early and someone had to sign for it at 4 in the morning. Once on sail canvas in the loft because a nor'easter knocked the power out and I was not leaving a half-cocked hull open to the damp. Sleep was never my problem. This was a choice. I had turned off every light in the house by 8 that evening. Not the way you turn off lights heading to bed. The way you close down a boatyard at the end of a long haul. Kitchen first, then the hallway. The living room Maggie had repainted twice because she could never settle between sea glass green and harbor gray. The study. The upstairs landing. Every switch. Every lamp. Every nightlight we had put in the bathroom 6 years ago when Maisie started staying weekends. One by one until the house on the hill above the harbor carried the kind of dark that has weight to it. From the road it looked empty. That was the point. My company truck, a white F-250 with the Callahan Boatworks decal across the tailgate, had been sitting in the yard lot since 3 that afternoon. I had asked Tom Wyatt, my foreman, to drive me home in his personal vehicle and not mention it to anyone. Tom has worked for me 28 years. He did not ask why. Men who spend their lives around the water learn that sometimes the fewer questions you ask, the smoother the tide runs. The 1977 Ford sat in the garage where it always sat. Dark green, rust along the wheel wells. The engine rebuilt once, but the body all original. I bought it in 1979. 1 year after I put everything I had into a 2-acre boatyard on the west shore of Harpswell. 45 years. And I had never once used it as a daily driver. It was mine the way certain things become yours, not because you used them, but because you earned them. I was not in the house that night. I was in the wheelhouse of the Helen May, a 32-foot lobster boat I built by hand in 1981 and named after my mother. She sat at the dock behind the boatyard, tied off at her usual cleat, hull dark against the water. On the dash, beside the compass Maggie gave me for our 20th anniversary, a tablet lay face down. The screen was dark. The camera application was running. The camera was connected to a motion sensor I had a security technician install 6 weeks earlier along the side door of the boatyard loft. The one with the old latch harder to see from the parking lot. The sensor communicated with the tablet through a wireless signal. No sound. Just a single vibration when triggered. One pulse, like a heartbeat against my palm. 72 years old. 46 years, building boats on the coast of Maine. I had built Callahan Boatworks from a single yard, with a leaking roof into an operation with 85 employees, 4 docks, and contracts for the fishing fleet across Casco Bay. I was not a man who panicked easily. But 3 months ago, something started to feel wrong. Not loud wrong. Not the kind that announces itself like a crack in a hull plank you hear from across the shop floor. The quiet kind. A number slightly off in an insurance filing. A 2-week delay in paperwork that should have taken 3 days. A question answered just a half second too smoothly. In this business I learned one thing above everything else. When a measurement does not add up, you do not ignore it and hope the wood straightens itself. You pull the plank. You check the grain. You find where the flaw runs before it opens under pressure. Only Arthur knew. My younger brother, 69, retired after 28 years as a fishing captain out of Casco Bay. I told him just enough to keep him close, without pulling him into water he did not need to be in yet. Arthur was the only person in my life I trusted completely. The way you trust a channel you have navigated so many times, you could run it in fog without instruments. I sat in the wheelhouse and let the harbor settle. Maggie's compass was still on the dash where it had been since 1999. Brass case, slightly tarnished, the needle still true. She had it engraved on the back, so you always find your way home. I had not moved it since the spring of 2021. Some people would say that is not healthy. Those people never lost Maggie Callahan. The fog pressed against the glass like something alive. The harbor was gone. The buoys were gone. The boatyard was a shadow with edges. The only sounds were water against the hull and the low creak of dock lines adjusting to the tide. I had been building boats long enough to know that trouble rarely comes from the direction you are watching. You spend your whole career checking the bow, and it is the stern fitting that gives way when the sea gets rough. I did not know exactly what was coming. What I knew was this. I had set the stage. No lights, no truck, no movement. A dark yard on a cold November night, in a harbor town, where nothing ever happened. I had made myself invisible inside my own world. The tide shifted. The dock lines creaked. The fog did not lift. At exactly 2:53 in the morning, the tablet vibrated once. I opened my eyes. I did not move anything else. Not my shoulders. Not my boots on the deck. Not my hands on the armrests. Just my eyes in the dark. Already adjusted. Already ready. I lifted the tablet toward me just enough to see the feed, without letting the glow reach the windows. The motion sensor on the side door of the boatyard loft had triggered. Someone was inside my building. And whoever it was, they were moving like they had been there before. The camera feed was grainy, the way night vision always is. That greenish-gray wash that flattens everything into shadow and outline. But it was clear enough for what I needed. A figure came through the side door of the boatyard loft slowly, deliberately, with the kind of patience that told me this was not improvised. No crash, no forced entry, just the soft resistance of a latch being worked open by someone who had studied it before tonight. The motion sensor caught the vibration the moment the latch gave way. One pulse against my palm. He was inside in under 40 seconds. Dark jacket, knit cap pulled low. No gloves, no mask. He swept a small silver flashlight once around the loft. A quick, practiced sweep, the kind a man makes not because he is lost, but because he wants confirmation that what he expects to find is actually there. His beam crossed the workbench. The tool rack on the far wall. The half-finished model on the shelf I had been carving since September. Then it swept across the Helen May's stern through the loft window. He looked at that boat for exactly 1 second, then moved on. He did not know I was sitting inside it. He found the desk without hesitating. Straight line. No pause. He pulled the chair back with his left hand and sat down as if the route from door to desk had been walked enough times in his mind that his body already knew the distance. Top drawer first. Quick. Barely a minute. He lifted folders, checked labels, replaced them. Middle drawer longer. He pulled files out, set them on the desk surface, paged through them with the flashlight tucked between 2 fingers so both hands stayed free. He photographed certain pages with his phone. The screen lit his face each time. But the angle was wrong from where the camera sat, and I could not see features clearly. Not yet. He worked the way a man works when he has rehearsed the steps. No wasted motion, no hesitation that might signal doubt. Whatever he was looking for, he had a clear picture of it. Bottom drawer, then back to the middle for something he had passed over the first time. A thick envelope near the back. He pulled it out, turned it over, read the front. I knew what he was reading because I had written it myself 3 days earlier in block letters. Maritime Insurance Q3 Summary. He tucked the envelope inside his jacket without opening it. 14 minutes. I counted every one of them on the dash clock beside Maggie's compass. I want to be honest about what happened inside me during those 14 minutes. Because some people would ask, why did you sit there? Why did you not flip the lights on? Why did you not call the police? Here is why. A police call that night would have produced a trespassing charge at best, a misdemeanor, a court date, and a story that ended before it truly started. I would have caught one man in one room, but what I suspected was not one man in one room. It was a structure. Financial, legal, deliberate, built over months. You do not dismantle a structure by pulling one nail. You find the keel first. In this business, we do not panic when a hull shifts under load. We assess the weight, we check the waterline, and we finish the voyage before we put her in dry dock. 46 years had taught me that much. At the 11-minute mark, he stood up from the desk and checked his phone. The flashlight shifted, and for just a moment, the beam caught the left side of his face from below. I saw the wedding ring first. Gold band. Slightly wider than standard. I had watched my daughter slide it onto that finger 10 years ago in a white clapboard church a quarter-mile from this harbor on an October Saturday, while Maggie pressed a handkerchief to the corner of her eye, and I stood in the front pew, working hard not to lose my composure. Then the jaw. The tilt of his chin when he was processing something. A few degrees left. Like he was listening to the words rather than reading them. 10 years of that gesture across my kitchen table at Thanksgiving, at Sunday dinners, at the visits that came more often after Maggie passed because Claire said she did not want me eating alone and Garrett always drove. Garrett Price. My son-in-law. The maritime estate attorney. He folded the remaining documents, tucked them inside his jacket beside the envelope, and retraced his steps without hurrying. Desk drawer closed. Chair pushed in. Flashlight off. Luftdoor. Side exit. Fogg. Goni. The harbor swallowed him the way it swallows everything on November nights. One moment, a shape in the dark. The next, nothing but the sound of the water. I sat in the wheelhouse for 2 more hours after that. Not because I could not move, because I needed the stillness. There is a kind of thinking that only happens when there is nothing left to do but let the shape of a thing settle. The way you let epoxy cure before you test the joint. You cannot rush it. If you do, the bond fails under the first real load. I let it settle. The fog held. The tide came in and the Helen May rose with it. Her dock lines going slack, and then taut again as the current shifted. I sat in the dark with my hands on the armrests of the captain's chair, and I did not move and I did not speak, and I let the shape of what I had just watched become something I could carry without it breaking me open. Around 4:30, a memory came back without invitation. The first time Garrett came to dinner, Maggie had made her clam chowder. The real kind, not the tourist version. Heavy cream, salt pork, potatoes from the garden she kept along the south side of the house. Garrett had eaten 2 bowls and complimented her twice. After they left, Maggie stood at the sink rinsing the pot and said quietly without turning around, "He reads a room the way a helmsman reads the wind, Frank." Fast and always to his advantage. I had taken it as a compliment then. Standing in the wheelhouse now, watching the first gray suggestion of dawn press against the fog, I understood she had been telling me something else entirely. Maggie had always been precise with language. She chose her words the way I chose timber. For the grain, not the appearance. Careful. Maggie had used exactly the right word. She always did. I reached for the burner phone in my jacket pocket. A prepaid flip phone bought 3 weeks earlier, at a gas station on Route 1. One number saved. I had been waiting for the moment, when I had enough to justify making the call. That moment had arrived. I made coffee at 5 in the morning and sat at the kitchen table where Maggie and I used to argue about the thermostat. She wanted 70. I kept it at 66, because I had grown up in a house where you wore 2 layers indoors and were grateful for the warmth your own body made. We never resolved it. After she was gone, I turned it up to 70 and left it there. Some arguments end not because someone wins, but because one of you runs out of time to keep having them. The kitchen was the one room I still kept a light on at night. A small lamp near the coffee maker. Nothing dramatic. The rest of the house I moved through carefully in the dark. The way you navigate a cabin below deck when the layout has shifted and you have not learned the new arrangement of things. But the kitchen always felt like itself. Same pale yellow walls Maggie chose in 1987. Same round table with the nick in the corner where Claire dropped a ceramic bowl the summer she was 12. I had never fixed that nick. Some things you leave because fixing them would mean admitting the moment that made them is gone. I drank my coffee black, and I did not rush. 46 years in the boatyard had taught me that the worst decisions come from men who move before they finish thinking. You react to a weather report without checking the tide chart first, without reading the barometer yourself, and you end up on a heading that turns out to be worse than the one you left. Different and better are not the same thing, so I sat. I let the gray November light come slowly through the window, while Harpswell slept, and I thought about Kettle Cove first. I always do when something heavy is pressing down on me. My father worked the boatyard there for 34 years. A small operation, repairs mostly, the kind of place where a man's hands told you everything about his life. He had one saying he repeated until it became the air inside our house. A man who builds nothing answers to everyone. He said it without bitterness. Just as fact. The way you state a tide time, or the temperature of the water, but I heard the instruction underneath it every single time. I left in the spring of 1972. 19 years old. $800. A canvas duffel that held everything I owned without straining the zipper. I did not look back. Not because I did not love the place. I did. The way you love something that shaped you without asking permission. But looking back felt like the first step toward going back. And going back was not part of the plan. 7 years I apprenticed under a master boatwright named Hank Morrison at a yard in Bath. Learned how to read oak grain by touch. Learned which timber bends and which timber breaks. Learned that the difference between a vessel that holds and one that fails is never one large mistake. It is always 100 small ones that no one thought to check. Hank told me once, standing over a hull we had been planking for 3 weeks. The day you stop checking is the day the water gets in. I have never forgotten that. In the fall of 1978, I put a down payment on a 2-acre lot on the west shore of Harpswell. Cinderblock office, a roof that leaked in 3 places, and a slip that could hold exactly 2 vessels if you did not mind them touching. I named it Callahan Boatworks because the name was honest. It told you what it was and who stood behind it. 46 years later, 85 people carried that name to work every morning. You build something one vessel at a time, one contract at a time, one hard winter at a time, until the thing you have built is larger than any version of yourself you could have imagined at the start. I stood up from the table and walked down the hallway toward the room at the end. Maggie's room. The door opened the way it always does. A slight resistance at the bottom where the carpet bunches. Then it gives. I had never fixed that either. Inside, the room was exactly as she left it in the spring of 2021. Dried sea lavender on the vanity in a small jar she had found at a yard sale in Brunswick. Her book on the nightstand face down, open to whatever page she had been reading the last evening she felt well enough to read. A pair of soft wool slippers near the door. Toes pointing outward the way feet naturally fall when you slip them off after a long day. And on the dresser beside the window, the compass. Not the brass one on the Helen May. A different one. Older, smaller. A wooden case with a glass face that Maggie had carried since before I knew her. She told me once it had belonged to her grandfather, a lobsterman out of Stonington who never lost a boat in 40 years of fishing. She kept it because she said it reminded her that direction is not something you find once. It is something you check again and again. I had not asked anyone to move these things. I had not moved them myself. People who did not know me well sometimes mentioned it carefully. The way people mention things they think you might not have considered. I had always considered it. I had simply decided differently. A man who spent 46 years tracking every plank and fastener in a vessel was not going to misplace the contents of his wife's room by accident. Everything was where it was because I chose to leave it that way. I sat on the edge of the bed, not lying down, just sitting. The way you sit when you need to think, and lying down, would feel like giving something up. Maggie and Claire had a relationship I was never fully inside of. That is the nature of certain things between mothers and daughters. They exist in a register that husbands and fathers can observe, but not entirely enter. What I knew was this. Maggie loved Claire with the specific intensity of a woman who recognized herself in her child and was simultaneously proud of that recognition and worried by it. She loves too deep and checks too little, Maggie told me once, years before Garrett was part of any conversation. We had been talking about Claire's first serious relationship in college, a young man who turned out to be exactly as unreliable as Maggie suspected from the first dinner. I had defended Claire then, said that trusting people was not a flaw, that it was who she was, that the world needed people who led with their heart before their suspicion. Maggie had looked at me with the particular patience she reserved for moments when she believed I was being sentimental at the expense of being honest. That is not a flaw, I had said. She did not argue. She simply moved on to something else, which was Maggie's way of saying she disagreed but had decided not to spend the energy proving it. I picked up the compass from the dresser and held it in my palm. The needle moved once, then settled, still pointing north after all these years. At 5 in the morning, I pulled the burner phone from my jacket and dialed the only number saved in it. Arthur answered on the second ring, like he had been sleeping with one ear toward the water his whole life. Arthur's house, 6:30, I said. Then I hung up. That was all he needed. Arthur had spent 28 years captaining fishing boats out of Casco Bay. He understood that when someone calls you before dawn and gives you a time and a location and nothing else, the nothing else is the part that matters. I drove the Ford. Headlights off until I reached the coast road past the elementary school. Not because I expected anyone to be watching at 5:15 in the morning on a residential street in November, but 3 months of quiet suspicion had rewired something in me. Every unnecessary light felt like an unnecessary word. And I had learned a long time ago that unnecessary words are how men give themselves away. The coast road ran south along the water for 2 miles before it turned inland toward Arthur's place. Fog sat heavy on the pavement. The Ford's engine ran low and steady, the way it always does in cold weather. No complaint. Just the road and the sound of a machine that had outlasted most of the decisions I had made since buying it. Arthur's house had not changed in 25 years. A shingled cabin set back from a gravel turnout, 50 yards from the water, with a dock that Arthur maintained himself every spring, even though he had not kept a boat there since Margaret passed. The shingles were the color of driftwood. The porch light was off. The kitchen window glowed the pale yellow of a single bulb, which meant he was already up, and the coffee was already made. I came through the side door without knocking. Arthur was at the table. 2 cups poured. He did not ask why I was driving the Ford instead of the company truck. He did not ask why I had called before dawn. He sat with his hands around his mug and waited. That was Arthur. 69 years old. Retired after 28 years behind the wheel of vessels that ran in weather most men would not walk their dogs in. He had captained trawlers, gill netters, and one winter a refrigerated transport barge through a January storm that took 2 other vessels and put their crews in the water. He was the kind of man who understood that sometimes the most useful thing you could do was be present and quiet and ready. He had learned that the same place I had, on the water, alone, in the dark, where there was no one to talk to, and the sea did not care about your feelings either way. I sat down across from him, pulled the tablet from my jacket, and set it on the table between us. "Watch this," I said. "All of it." I pressed play and turned the screen toward him. 14 minutes. I watched Arthur instead of the video. I had already seen it twice by that point, and I needed to see it through someone else's eyes. He did not react much. That was Arthur. His face stayed level the way it does when he is processing something and does not want the processing to show. He picked up his coffee once midway through, held it near his mouth for a moment, then set it back down without drinking. When the video ended, he looked up. "How long have you known?" he said. "Known for certain since 2:53 this morning." I turned the tablet face down. Suspected about 3 months. I walked him through it. In July, I had requested a detailed statement from the Maritime Insurance Reserve account, the one I had signed broad authority over to Garrett 2 years earlier, to cover what he described as ongoing legal consulting fees for a potential expansion into deepwater vessel contracts. Standard practice, I had told myself at the time. A maritime attorney managing legal costs. Nothing unusual. Garrett had taken 2 weeks to produce the statement. 2 weeks for paperwork that should have taken 3 days. He had given me explanations. A filing backlog at the insurer. A junior associate out sick. A document request from a state regulatory office that had to take priority. Every excuse was plausible on its own. Together they had a texture I recognized from 46 years of watching people explain things they did not want explained. In this business, when a man gives you 3 reasons for a delay, the real reason is usually none of them. I had not confronted Garrett then. Instead, I started watching quietly. The way you watch a gauge that reads slightly off, not sounding the alarm yet, just keeping your eye on the needle and noting the pattern. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Arthur asked. "Because I needed a blind spot," I said. "Garrett knows my office. He knows my house. He has been inside both enough times to know what is normal and what is not. But he does not know your kitchen table, Arthur. He has never had a reason to think about it." Arthur considered that. Nodded once. Slowly. The way he nods when something makes sense he wishes did not. 3 weeks ago, I had hired a woman named Vivienne Drake to look at the finances. She came recommended through a situation Arthur had been involved in 2 years prior, a case involving a seafood broker and some irregularities in catch documentation. Arthur had put me in contact with her. I had not asked for details about the original case. Arthur had not offered them. Vivienne had spent 12 years as a revenue agent with the IRS before leaving to work independently. The last 8 of those years, she had built cases around what she called structured misdirection. Money moved in ways designed to look routine until you mapped the full picture. She was 54, thorough, and not easily impressed by explanations. All contact with Vivienne had gone through the burner phone. No emails, no calls from my regular line, no meetings at any address connected to me or to Callahan Boatworks. She had been working quietly for 3 weeks, and, Arthur said, she sent a message yesterday. 2 words. Arthur waited. The kitchen was quiet, except for the sound of the baseboard heater clicking on. "Found it." He set his mug down on the table with a sound that was quieter than it should have been, given what those 2 words meant. "Does Claire know any of this?" he asked. The question sat in the kitchen for a moment. I looked at my coffee, thought about Claire the way she had looked at the contract signing ceremony 3 years ago when I named her CEO. How proud she had seemed, how certain. Thought about the way Garrett had shaken my hand that day with a smile that moved more like calculation than warmth. The look I had seen across negotiating tables my whole career. A man already 3 steps ahead of the conversation he was pretending to be present in. "I do not know," I said. "And I need to find out." Arthur stood up and refilled both cups without asking whether I wanted more. He carried them back to the table and sat down and looked at me across 30 years of mornings like this one. Not always this heavy, but always honest. "So what is the play, Frank?" I set the burner phone on the table between us. "We wait for Vivienne's full report. Then we move." Arthur nodded. He did not ask how bad it was. Arthur had been on the water long enough to understand that you do not ask about the size of the swell once you are already in it. You check your rigging. You keep your bow into the wind. and you trust that the shore ahead is closer than the shore behind. I came home from Arthur's and went straight to the boatyard. Not to the shop floor, where the morning crew would already be moving between the dry dock and the paint bay. To the loft. The stairs creaked in the same two places they had creaked since 1989, when I built the second story above the office to give myself a workspace where I could think without the sound of pneumatic sanders coming through. The walls. The loft looked exactly as I had arranged it 3 days earlier. That was important. Not a single thing out of place. Not a drawer left open. A fraction wider than it should be. I had spent 40 minutes on Sunday afternoon repositioning every folder, every stack, every loose page to exactly where it had been before I started. Garrett had been in this room for 14 minutes the night before. The room needed to look as though he had never been here at all. I started with the desk surface. 3 folders arranged at a slight angle. The way papers accumulate naturally when you work at a desk every day. Not a neat stack, but the particular disorder of a man who knows where everything is even when it looks like he does not. I had learned a long time ago that a workspace that looks too organized makes people suspicious. A desk that looks lived in makes people comfortable. Comfortable people stop paying attention. Then the drawers. Top drawer was what it had always been. Pens, a roll of electrical tape, a small flashlight for power outages, a tide chart from the previous season. I had never gotten around to throwing away an address book I had not updated since 2011 because everyone I needed was already in my phone. Garrett had opened it. I had seen that on the camera feed. Nothing there had interested him. The middle drawer was the heart of it. 3 months ago, when I first began to understand that something was wrong, I had made a quiet decision. I gathered every document that actually mattered. The current vessel contracts, the operating agreements for Callahan Boatworks, the waterfront property deeds for all 4 docks, my will, account statements for everything connected to my personal finances. And I moved them out of this loft. Owen kept them. My son, 33 years old, emergency physician at a hospital in Portland, 40 minutes up the coast. He kept them in a locked cabinet in his private office at the medical center. I had chosen Owen over Arthur for a specific reason. A hospital has its own security infrastructure, its own professional confidentiality protocols, and Garrett had never shown the slightest interest in Owen's workplace. It was as close to invisible as I could make it. What remained in the drawers of this desk was a carefully constructed version of nothing. Old quarterly maintenance reports, the kind of dense formatted documents that look significant at a glance and reveal very little on close reading. Copies of insurance filings that had expired 2 or 3 seasons ago. A folder of correspondence so routine it could have been published in a trade newsletter without raising a single eyebrow, and in the upper middle drawer, the one Garrett had gone to with the most purpose. The one whose contents he had photographed and removed. A thick manila envelope, sealed with a metal clasp. On the front, in block letters I had written myself, Maritime Insurance Q3 Summary. Inside that envelope was a nautical chart from the previous season. A standard coastal navigation chart for the waters between Harpswell and the outer islands. Nothing else. I had prepared it the Thursday before. Took the chart off the wall in the downstairs office. Folded it twice to fit. Slid it into the envelope, sealed the clasp, and placed it in the drawer where Garrett would find exactly what he expected to find. The question some people might ask is why Garrett did not open the envelope right there in the loft. He had a flashlight. He had time. The answer is that Garrett is a lawyer. Maritime estate attorneys do not open sealed documents in the dark in someone else's building at 3 in the morning. They take them. They secure them. They examine them in a controlled environment where they can think clearly and document what they find. Opening a sealed envelope on site would mean evidence of tampering if anything went to court. Garrett would have thought of that. He was meticulous in the way certain predators are meticulous. His caution was one of the things I was counting on. He had spent 14 minutes in this room taking a document that would tell him exactly nothing. He did not know that yet. I thought about how he would approach it. Probably that same evening, or the next morning. Sitting at his own desk with coffee, breaking the seal with a letter opener, the way lawyers do, unfolding the contents carefully. The moment when he pulled out a nautical chart from last season instead of an insurance reserve summary, his expression would be the one thing I would have given a great deal to see. But that moment was his problem. Mine was this room. I went through every drawer one more time. Every folder checked against the photograph I had taken with my phone on Sunday. Every stack squared to the same margin of disorder. I was not doing this for Garrett's benefit. I was doing it because the work required it. A plan that depends on the other side not knowing they have been outmaneuvered only holds if you maintain the illusion completely. Down to the last centimeter. Garrett needed to believe he had found something. He needed to believe he was still ahead. A man who believes he is ahead does not run. He consolidates. He takes his time. He makes the next move according to his own schedule, not someone else's. And while he was doing that, Vivienne was still working. I locked the desk when I finished, turned the key, and heard the catch settle into place. The documents inside were worthless, but there is something about locking a thing that reminds you it belongs to you. That loft, that desk, that lock. Mine. He had come into my building believing I was asleep in my house on the hill. He had left with a decoy, and he had no idea I had been watching every second of it from 50 yards away in the wheelhouse of a boat named after my mother. That afternoon my phone buzzed. Not the burner. My personal phone. A text from Owen. 3 words. Need to see you. I had not told Owen anything yet, which meant he had found something on his own. Owen arrived at 7 that evening. No knock. Just the sound of his key in the lock and his voice coming down the hallway. Dad! I had given him a key when he finished his residency and moved back to Maine for the position at Portland General. That was 5 years ago. He had never abused it. Never walked in unannounced at an inconvenient hour. Never treated it as anything other than what it was. Permission to enter without formality. Because formality between a father and son who have both lost the same woman is a waste of the time you have left. He came into the living room with his medical bag over one shoulder, still wearing the dark fleece he layered under his coat on cold shifts, 33 years old. And there were still moments where the way he set his bag down, the way he looked around a room before he spoke, where I saw Maggie so clearly, it was like looking through glass at something on the other side. I had not turned on the television. There was one reading lamp on low in the corner. We sat across from each other the way people sit when they have something real to say and do not want anything else competing for the space. You texted me, I said. What did you want to talk about? He was quiet for a moment. Owen has always been careful with words, not hesitant, precise. He became a doctor for the same reason. He had been good at everything, requiring close attention. He understood that the gap between what someone says and what they mean is where most of the important information lives. In January, he said, I was at the boatyard visiting you. You were down at the dock with Tom checking the hauling gear on a trawler. I was upstairs in the loft, waiting. There was a folder on your desk, a billing statement from something called Atlantic Risk. Consulting out of Providence, Rhode Island. He paused. I asked Garrett about it later. Casually. He said it was a risk management firm handling regulatory compliance for some new insurance coverage you were considering for deep water contracts. And you believed him? I said. I had no reason not to. He said it without defense, just as fact. But last week, I was helping you sort through the older files in the storage room downstairs. You remember, you asked me to help reorganize the filing cabinet near the paint bay. I remembered. I had asked him specifically because I wanted a second pair of eyes on those files, without explaining why. I found 3 more statements from the same company, Owen said. Different dates, larger amounts, and Dad. He leaned forward slightly. I called the Rhode Island Secretary of State's office. There is no record of Atlantic Risk Consulting having any active business operations. No office address beyond a registered agent mailbox. No employees on file. No state business license. No contracts with any marine insurance carrier in New England. I let the room stay quiet for a moment. "You went that far," I said. "You taught me to check the work," he said. "That is what you always told me. Do not trust the summary. Go to the source." He was right. I had told him that. About homework, and later about medical school, and later still, about reading lab results and patient histories. The document that matters is always the one behind the document you were given. I looked at him for a moment. Then I asked the question I had been carrying since the morning after the video. "Owen, when you did my annual physical last spring, did Garrett ever ask you about the results?" He went still. Not dramatically. Just the particular stillness of someone whose mind has shifted gears without warning. "Once," he said. "He called the office a few days after your appointment. Said he had been worried about you since Mom died. That he wanted to make sure you were taking care of yourself." "What did you tell him?" "I told him your numbers were good. That everything looked normal. That is all there was to tell. You were fine." I nodded slowly. I did not explain why I had asked. I could see Owen filing the question away, turning it over, beginning to connect it to the Atlantic risk statements in a way that had not occurred to him yet. That was fine. He would get there. Owen always got there. Then he said something that changed the temperature of the room. "Dad, Garrett called me again last week. Asked how your memory has been lately." The sentence landed in the kitchen and stayed there. I felt it the way you feel a shift in the current beneath a hull. Not visible on the surface. But the vessel knows. The water has changed direction, and whatever was holding steady a moment ago is now moving towards something else. I told Owen what I could. Not all of it. I had learned early in my career that you share information in proportion to what someone needs to act, not in proportion to what you know. I told him I had concerns about certain financial transactions, that I had hired someone to look into them. I mentioned Vivian Drake by name and described her background in broad terms. Former federal investigator, now independent, experienced in cases where money moved in ways designed not to be followed. I did not tell him about the video. Not yet. What I needed from him was specific. "I need you to get my complete medical file from Dr. Sawyer's office," I said. "Helen Sawyer. She has been my physician for 11 years. I need the original records, not a printed summary. The source documents." Dr. Helen Sawyer had been my family physician since the year after Maggie's first diagnosis. She was methodical and direct, and kept records the way a good harbor master keeps a log. Thorough, time-stamped, nothing left to interpretation. I trusted her records the way I trusted Arthur behind the wheel of a vessel. Completely, and without reservation. Owen studied me. The reading lamp caught the edge of his face, and for a moment, the resemblance to Maggie was so strong, I had to look away. "Dad, are you sick?" "No," I said. "But someone may be trying to make it look like I am." He was quiet for a long time after that. Long enough that I could hear the baseboard heater click on in the hallway. The same sound that had filled this house on quiet evenings for 30 years. A sound so familiar it usually did not register at all. Tonight it did. Then he nodded. "Tell me what you need." That was Owen. No unnecessary questions. No performance of shock or outrage. Just the clear-eyed steadiness of a man who understood that the most useful thing he could do right now was listen and then act. Maggie would have recognized it in him. It was the same thing she had always done for me. I walked him to the door. He pulled on his coat and stopped with his hand on the frame. "Dad," he said, "Garrett called me last week about your memory. But he also asked something else. He asked whether I thought you had been making decisions clearly, whether there had been any signs of confusion." I said nothing. But inside, what had been a question finished becoming something else entirely. Vivian Drake did not waste words. She had a folder open on the table before I sat down. She was exactly as Arthur had described her when he first put us in contact 3 weeks earlier. Compact and still. The kind of person who takes up less space than they actually occupy, because all of their attention is directed outward rather than inward. She possessed exactly the kind of focus you would expect from someone who had spent 12 years inside the IRS, building cases against people who believed they were smarter than the system that was watching them. She sat across from Arthur and me at his kitchen table, with 3 stacks of documents and the expression of a woman about to read a weather report. "I will go in order," she said. Financial first. The company was called Atlantic Risk Consulting, registered in Providence, Rhode Island, through the Rhode Island Secretary of State's office. A state chosen specifically because Rhode Island has relatively permissive business formation requirements. Minimal disclosure. No requirement to list the names of beneficial owners in public filings. The registered agent was a firm that processed hundreds of such incorporations annually and asked no questions beyond what the paperwork required. The sole listed principal was a man named Derek Price, Garrett's younger brother, an accountant based in Providence who, according to Vivienne's research, had no clients of record, no professional website, and no verifiable business activity beyond serving as the named officer of 2 similarly structured limited liability companies over the past 3 years. "Atlantic Risk has no employees," Vivienne said. "No office address beyond the registered agent mailbox. No contracts. No service agreements. No deliverables of any kind in any public record. It exists on paper and nowhere else. What it did have was a bank account. And into that account over a period of 10 months between September of 2022 and June of 2023, a total of $290,000 had been transferred from the Callahan Boatworks Maritime Insurance Reserve account. The transfers had been structured carefully, under federal banking law, specifically the Bank Secrecy Act. Financial institutions are required to file a currency transaction report for any cash transaction exceeding $10,000. To avoid triggering additional scrutiny, Garrett had not moved the money in large wire transfers. Instead, each monthly movement had been broken into multiple smaller transactions, none of which individually crossed the reporting threshold. This practice, deliberately structuring transactions to avoid federal reporting requirements, is itself a federal crime, separate from, and in addition to whatever fraud underlies it. He was not just stealing, Vivienne said. He was structuring. That is a Title 31 violation. It carries its own penalties, independent of the underlying conduct. Of the $290,000 received by Atlantic Risk, Derek Price had retained approximately 8%, paid to himself in a series of small transfers over the same period. The remaining funds had been wired to an account at a private bank in the Cayman Islands. Vivienne had identified the receiving institution, but had not yet traced the ultimate destination. "The Cayman account is the wall," she said. "I can see the money went in. I cannot yet see where it went from there. But the structure of the transfers, the timing, the amounts, it is consistent with funds being held for future use rather than spent. Whoever controls that account is waiting for something." Arthur set his coffee down. He did not say anything. Vivienne moved to the second stack. Garrett was preparing a conservatorship petition. Under Maine law, a conservatorship of the estate is a court-supervised arrangement in which a judge, upon finding that an individual lacks the capacity to manage their own financial affairs, appoints a conservator to handle those affairs on the individual's behalf. The legal standard requires clear and convincing evidence, typically medical testimony, that the subject cannot adequately manage property, contracts, or financial decisions. Once granted, the conservator holds legal authority that supersedes the subject's own. The subject cannot enter contracts, cannot sell or transfer property, cannot make financial decisions without the conservator's approval. In practical terms, Vivienne said, it is a cage built from court orders and medical records. The door locks from the outside, and once it closes, it is extremely difficult to open from within. The target was me. The intended conservator, based on documents Vivienne had located through Garrett's professional filing history, was Garrett himself acting through Claire in her capacity as CEO. "Does Claire know about this?" I asked. Vivienne answered without hesitation. She knows Garrett has been working on something related to the company's future. Based on what I can establish, she is aware of what he described to her as a succession framework, a legal structure for transitioning leadership of Callahan Boatworks. She does not know about Atlantic Risk. She does not know about the money. And she does not know the legal mechanism he is actually building. She paused. What she knows, and what is actually happening, are two entirely different things. Vivienne turned to the third stack. She unfolded a printed page. Not a newspaper, but a copy of a 2016 article from a Portland legal trade publication. The headline concerned a civil complaint filed against the estate of a retired fishing captain, 76 years old, who had signed over 90% of his assets to a series of holding entities over an 18-month period beginning in 2014. The assets included 2 commercial vessels and waterfront property in South Portland. The attorney who had structured and executed those transfers was listed in the complaint as a material witness. His name was Garrett Price. No criminal charges had been filed. The civil complaint had been settled under a confidentiality agreement. Garrett had not been disbarred. He had left his Portland practice the following year. By the time the dust settled, he was already in Harpswell, where he met Claire. "He did not stumble into your family, Frank," Vivienne said. She said it without drama. The way she said everything. As a data point, not an accusation. He chose it. I looked at the article. Garrett, 7 years younger, in a suit, standing outside a courthouse, smiling the way people smile when they know a camera is present. "There is one more thing," Vivienne said. He paid someone. A doctor. $16,000 transferred to a private account belonging to a Dr. Alan Whitfield, licensed in New Hampshire. I do not yet know what the payment was for. But I will. Arthur made a sound that might have been the beginning of a word. Then he stopped. I drove home alone that evening. The coast road was dark. The fog had lifted enough to show the tree line against a sky that held no stars. Somewhere between Arthur's cabin and the hill above the harbor, something shifted in the way I was holding all of this. It stopped being about $290,000. It stopped being about Callahan Boatworks. It became about something closer to the center of a man. The part that exists before the company, before the money, before the vessels, and the docks, and the contracts. The part that has only his name on it and nothing else. Owen came back on Wednesday evening, with 2 folders tucked under his arm, and the expression of a man who had spent the better part of 2 days deciding how much to say. I heard his key in the front door at 8:29. I was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I had not touched. The overhead light was on for the first time in 3 nights. The kitchen felt different with the light on at night. Smaller somehow, like the walls had moved inward just enough to notice. He set both folders on the table and pulled out the chair across from mine. He did not take off his jacket. "I want to start with the second folder," he said. "But you need the first one first." He opened the first folder and slid a printed page toward me. A side-by-side comparison. On the left, a scanned copy of a medical assessment form. On the right, a screenshot from Dr. Helen Sawyer's secure electronic record system pulled directly from her office database, with her authorization stamp at the bottom. Owen walked me through 4 specific differences. The MoCA score, a standardized cognitive screening test, had been changed from 28 to 18. A score of 28 indicates normal cognition, fully intact. A score of 18 suggests moderate cognitive impairment, the kind that would concern a court. The kind a judge would look at and begin to consider whether this man should still be making his own decisions. I have been scheduling vessel contracts and managing payroll without a calendar error for 46 years. A clinical note had been added that did not exist in Dr. Sawyer's original record. Patient demonstrated spatial temporal disorientation during examination, unable to correctly identify current month or recall recent appointments. Dr. Sawyer had written no such thing. I could tell you the date of every vessel launch and every insurance renewal for the past decade without checking a single file. A missed medication notation appeared in the altered version. A suggestion that I had been non-compliant with a blood pressure prescription. I have not missed a dose in 5 years. Dr. Sawyer's record confirmed it. A minor adjustment had been made to a blood panel result. Not enough to trigger alarm on its own. Enough, combined with the other changes, to build a picture. A picture of a man whose mind was failing. A man who could not be trusted with the things he had built. Who had access to this form, I asked. Owen looked at the table for a moment. The original lives in Dr. Sawyer's system. It is locked, encrypted, accessible only by her staff. But the assessment copy that gets forwarded to outside parties for legal or insurance purposes, that one passes through an intermediary. A processing service. Anyone who knew which service handled the routing and had either authorization or enough money to acquire it could intercept the copy before it reached its destination and make targeted alterations. Someone had taken a real document and made careful, targeted edits, not sloppy, not rushed. The kind of changes a person makes when they understand exactly what a judge looks for in a competency petition, when they have done it before. Owen closed the first folder and placed both hands flat on top of it. He looked at me directly. You were not just trying to take his money, Dad. You were trying to take his mind. The kitchen was very quiet after that. I could hear the wind coming off the water through the east-facing window. The November kind. The kind with salt in it. Owen opened the second folder. It was thinner. 3 printed pages. He explained that in August, Claire had opened an email on the family laptop. The one she and Garrett shared when visiting Harpswell. Garrett had left the browser open. The email was from a legal services firm in Portland. The subject line read, Coastal Asset Restructuring Framework, Callahan Estate. Claire had read it. The email referenced an assessment timeline, a corporate transition structure, and what it called a voluntary conservatorship pathway. Claire had not understood all of it. What she understood was enough to unsettle her. She did not tell me. She told Owen once, briefly, in late August, framing it as a question. Is Dad okay? Garrett mentioned something about a legal review of the company. Owen had reassured her. Not yet knowing what he was reassuring her about. She does not know about Atlantic Risk, Owen said. She does not know about the money. She does not know about Dr. Whitfield, or the altered records. What she knows is a fragment, a corner of a much larger picture shown to her by a man who made sure she could only see that much. I set the side-by-side comparison face down on the table. I looked at Owen. He had carried this here, knowing what it meant, knowing that the pages in that folder were not just evidence of fraud, but evidence that someone had tried to rewrite the story of who his father was, to change the numbers that described my mind, the way you would alter a chart to move a channel marker, so that anyone navigating by that chart would run aground before they knew the bottom had changed. I stood up from the table and walked to the counter where Maggie used to leave her grocery lists. I picked up a pen. I am filing with the state medical board tonight, I said. Not tomorrow. Tonight. Owen nodded once. He had brought a third page. A pre-drafted complaint template, filled in with the specific alterations, the document source, and Dr. Alan Whitfield's name and license number. He slid it across the table. You will need to sign it, he said. I cannot file on your behalf. It has to come from you as the patient. I signed at the bottom. The State Medical Board of Maine accepts complaints online at any hour. I filed at 10:15 that evening from the kitchen table with Owen beside me and the 2 folders still open in front of us. After I submitted, I closed the laptop. Owen gathered his folders, put on his coat, and stopped at the door. Dad, he said. Then he stopped. I know, I said. He left. I heard his car pull out of the driveway and waited until the sound faded before I moved. I stood in the kitchen alone and thought about a Tuesday afternoon when Claire was 7 years old and Maggie had a doctor's appointment and I had a vessel delivery I could not cancel. I brought Claire along. She sat in the bow of my workboat for 6 hours with a book on her lap and a thermos of hot cocoa, never once complaining. Watching the harbor the way her mother watched people, with the kind of attention that does not announce itself, but misses nothing. I had trusted her with the bow. I had trusted her with the company. I had trusted her with everything. Trust, once given to the people who matter, is not a transaction. It does not ask to be returned, but it is the hardest thing in the world to rebuild once the space between two people has been filled with something else. Eleanor Marsh had retired from the bench 5 years ago. She still kept an office because, as she told me once over the phone before we met in person, retirement is for people who have stopped caring about the outcome. The office was on the 3rd floor of the Harbor Trust building in Brunswick, 8 miles north of Harpswell, 6 blocks from the Cumberland County Courthouse where she had spent 18 years as a civil court judge. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on 3 walls, the kind that actually hold books rather than serve as furniture. Case reporters, statutory compilations, treatises on estate law, and elder rights dense enough to ballast a 40-foot ketch. Her desk was dark cherry, broad, and almost entirely clear. A woman who had presided over thousands of hearings had learned that the papers you leave out are the ones you are still thinking about. Eleanor Marsh did not leave things unfinished. She had been referred to me by Vivienne 5 years earlier, at the tail end of a complicated matter involving a seafood broker Arthur had worked with, a situation I had never asked the full details of and Arthur had never offered. What I knew was that Eleanor had been the attorney who resolved it, and that Vivienne had said simply, "She is the person you want when the other side believes they have more time than you do." I had kept her name for 5 years. It turned out I needed it. Arthur sat in the chair near the window without speaking. That was his contribution. His presence, which was not a small thing. A man who has spent 28 years moving vessels through difficult conditions develops a quality of steadiness that a room can feel without anyone naming it. Arthur provided ballast. I was grateful for it. I laid everything out for Eleanor in the order it had happened. The delayed insurance statement in July. The decision to hire Vivienne. The camera installation. The 3 weeks of surveillance. The video from Monday morning. 2:53, 14 minutes. Garrett with a silver flashlight at my desk. Vivienne's findings. Atlantic risk. Derek price. $290,000. Moved in structured transactions over 10 months. The Cayman account. The $16,000 paid to Dr. Alan Whitfield. And Portland. 2016. Eleanor listened to all of it without writing a single word. She had a yellow legal pad in front of her, and a pen beside it, and neither moved. This was, I would later understand, how she listened when she was doing the real work. No notes, because notes interrupted the larger pattern she was assembling in her mind. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she asked exactly one question. "Has he filed anything yet?" "Not as far as we can determine," I said. "Then we still have time." She picked up her pen and set it down again without using it. "Not a great deal of time, but enough if we move correctly." She explained conservatorship the way a doctor explains a diagnosis. Plainly, without softening it into something it was not. Under Maine law, she said, a conservatorship of the estate is a court-supervised arrangement in which a judge, upon finding that an individual lacks the mental capacity to manage their own financial affairs, appoints a conservator to take legal control of those affairs. The standard requires clear and convincing evidence. Medical testimony carries the greatest weight. A psychiatric or neurological evaluation showing cognitive decline is typically the foundation on which the entire petition rests. Without it, a conservatorship petition has very little chance of surviving a challenge. Once granted, the conservator holds authority that supersedes the subject's own decision-making. The subject cannot sign contracts, cannot transfer property, cannot manage accounts, cannot make business decisions of any kind without the conservator's approval. She let that sit. In practical terms, she said, it is a cage built from court orders and medical records. The door locks from the outside, and once it closes, reopening it requires proving a negative. Proving that you are not what someone else's paperwork says you are. That is an extraordinarily difficult thing to do from inside. Arthur shifted in his chair. I did not. Garrett's strategy, Eleanor continued, is architecturally straightforward. He needs two components: a medical record showing cognitive decline and a legal mechanism to exploit it. The payment to Dr. Whitfield appears to be the medical component. If Whitfield produced a fraudulent neurological evaluation, one that manufactured evidence of impairment that does not exist, that evaluation becomes the foundation of the conservatorship petition. And if the petition is granted through a fraudulent evaluation, I said, then you lose control of Callahan Boatworks, your personal accounts, your real property, the waterfront deeds for all 4 docks, every financial decision that remains in your life, potentially permanently, depending on how the order is written. She said it without inflection. Garrett, acting through Claire as CEO, would effectively control everything you have built, including 4 waterfront properties whose combined market value, if sold to a commercial developer, would exceed anything the boatyard itself generates in a decade. I looked at the window behind her. Beyond the rooftops of Brunswick, somewhere to the south, the harbor where I had spent 46 years. I thought about what it would mean to walk into a courthouse as the subject of a conservatorship petition. My name on a filing that described me as a man no longer capable of deciding what to do with the work of his lifetime. What about Dr. Whitfield? I asked. The payment, Vivienne found. Eleanor nodded slowly. If Garrett paid a physician to produce a fraudulent medical evaluation intended for use in a legal proceeding, that is not a civil matter. That is healthcare fraud under federal law. Title 18. Section 1347. It is also obstruction of justice if the evaluation was designed for court submission. And depending on how the arrangement between Garrett and Whitfield was structured, it may constitute conspiracy. The physician faces criminal exposure as well. She folded her hands on the desk. But I need documentation. I need the fraudulent evaluation itself. And I need Dr. Sawyer's original records to establish the baseline. Without both, we have a suspicious payment and nothing to attach it to. Owen is working on the records, I said. Good. Tell him to move quickly. She stood and walked to the window. Below, Brunswick was going about its Thursday morning. Traffic. On Main Street. A delivery truck, idling, at an intersection. A woman walking a dog, past the courthouse steps. Ordinary life proceeding at its ordinary pace. You have been in the boatyard business 46 years, Frank, she said without turning around. You know what a load line is. I did. Every vessel has one. A mark on the hull that tells you the maximum weight she can safely carry. Cross it, and it does not matter how well you built her. The water does not care about your craftsmanship. It only cares about the math. Garrett has been running this vessel overloaded for 2 years, Eleanor said. Something is going to give. The question is whether it gives on your terms or his. I left her office 40 minutes later with a list of 3 things she needed within 72 hours. The video, properly documented. Vivienne's financial analysis, formatted for court. And Owen's medical comparison. The first 2 were straightforward. The third required Owen, and I already knew from the way he had stopped at my door 2 nights ago, hand on the frame, starting a sentence he did not finish, that Owen had something else he had not told me yet. Something he was still deciding whether to say. By Sunday evening, every piece was in position. All that remained was deciding how to use them. Arthur had cleared the coffee table sometime before 4. Moved the magazines, the Tide Almanac, the small wooden decoy duck he had kept there since Margaret passed. In its place, Vivienne's laptop, Eleanor's leather briefcase laid flat and open, Owen's folder with the medical records, and my tablet with the 14-minute video still cued to the beginning. 5 chairs pulled close. 1 table. 1 direction. Vivienne spoke first the way she always did. Without preamble. She confirmed that Derek Price's location in Providence had been independently verified and that the financial flow diagram was court-ready. Origin, pathway, destination, the full structuring pattern mapped and documented. Structuring is a federal offense under Title 31, Eleanor said, without looking up from her notes. Even if the Cayman account stays sealed, the pattern of transfers alone is prosecutable. Vivian nodded. Garrett knows that. Which is why he needed the conservatorship in place before anyone started asking questions. Once he controls the estate, he controls the narrative. The money disappears into a framework he administers. No one looks twice at transfers authorized by a court-appointed conservator. Owen went next. He set his folder on the table and spoke in the measured tone he uses when delivering difficult information. The voice that does not rush, does not soften, just moves forward. The State Medical Board received the complaint filing Wednesday night, he said. They opened a preliminary review Thursday morning. During the intake period, which typically runs 5 to 10 business days, the subject of the complaint is not notified. The board does not make contact at this stage. They review documentation only. I asked the question I needed answered before anything else. Can Whitfield reach Garrett before tomorrow morning? Owen shook his head. Not through official channels. The board will not issue a formal investigation notice before Tuesday, at the earliest. Whitfield will not know anything has been filed until that notice arrives by certified mail. And informally, Whitfield does not know Garrett's name is connected to this complaint. The filing names Whitfield as the subject. Garrett is referenced only as the party who arranged payment. Whitfield would have to know to call Garrett. Right now, he has no reason to think a complaint exists. I looked at Eleanor. 12 hours from tonight until 9:15 tomorrow morning, she said. That is enough. Eleanor took the next 20 minutes. She had done this before. Not this specific case, but the architecture of it. 18 years on the bench, then 5 in elder law. She understood how these structures collapsed, and she understood what held them together. The confrontation would take place at the Callahan Boatworks main building on Harbor Road. Not my home. A place of business. My place of business. That distinction carries a different legal weight. Garrett had a standing Monday morning management meeting at the boatyard, a schedule I had established 3 years ago, and he had never questioned. He would arrive expecting a routine meeting. He would find something else. The evidence would be presented in sequence. First, the 14-minute video. Garrett's face. Garrett's ring. Garrett's 14 minutes going through my desk. Second, Vivian's financial diagram. The 10 transfers. Derek's 8%. The Atlantic risk shell. The structuring pattern. Third, the medical records. The altered assessment bearing my name, alongside Dr. Helen Sawyer's certified original. The 4 specific discrepancies documented and signed by Owen as my treating physician. Fourth, the Portland file. 2016. The 76-year-old fishing captain. The waterfront properties. The quiet departure. Garrett would be asked to sign 3 documents. The first, a repayment agreement for $290,000, structured over 18 months with interest, secured against his personal assets, and co-signed by Derek Price as a party to the original transfers. The second, a formal resignation from all advisory, fiduciary, and consulting roles connected to Callahan Boatworks or any Callahan family trust. The third, a written commitment, witnessed and notarized, that no conservatorship petition bearing my name would be filed in any jurisdiction by Garrett Price or any party acting on his behalf. And if he refuses, Arthur said. It was the first thing he had said since the meeting started. Eleanor folded her hands on the table. Then we file a criminal referral on the structuring. A fraud complaint with the court for the altered medical document. And a formal elder abuse complaint with the Maine Attorney General's office. We have enough for all 3. The room was quiet for a moment. The baseboard heater clicked on in the hallway. I confirmed the decoy. He took the envelope, I said. He has a nautical chart from last season inside a manila envelope marked Maritime Insurance Q3 Summary. As of Thursday, his Portland attorney has received a copy of what Garrett believes is a financial document supporting his case. Eleanor allowed herself a small, precise nod. Which means tomorrow morning Garrett will walk into that boatyard, believing he holds documentation that gives him leverage. He will be wrong, and when a man walks into a negotiation convinced he has the advantage, he telegraphs his entire position before he says a single word. Owen looked at me. I looked at the table. The meeting ended just before 9. Vivienne closed her laptop and packed her file box without ceremony. Eleanor snapped her briefcase shut, shook my hand once, and said she would be at the boatyard by 8:50. Owen squeezed my shoulder on his way out, the same way he had at his mother's funeral. He did not say anything, because there was nothing useful left to say. Arthur and I sat in the living room after they left. The table was cleared. 2 cups of coffee, both going cold. The fog had come back. I could hear it in the way the harbor sounds softened, the way the channel buoys became distant, and then disappeared entirely. Arthur said, "Maggie would have been proud of you." I did not answer right away. I let that land where it landed, which was somewhere between my chest and the back of my throat. There are certain sentences that arrive with more weight than the words inside them account for. That was one. After a while I said, "I will let you know at 9:16 tomorrow morning." Arthur nodded once. He did not smile, but something around his eyes shifted. The way a man's face changes when he has decided to trust the outcome without needing to see it first. I drove home in the dark. The Ford's headlights cut through the fog on the coast road. The engine ran steady and low. No complaint, no hesitation, just the road, and the sound of it carrying me forward. I thought about Garrett somewhere in Harpswell right now, probably reviewing what he believed were my insurance documents, probably satisfied. He thought he had the financial records. He thought he had 14 months of careful preparation, a brother in Providence, a doctor in New Hampshire, and a daughter who had not said no. He thought he was ahead. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I got home at 10. I did not go upstairs. I walked through the front door, set my keys on the hall table where they always go, and moved to the living room. The same sofa, the same cushion, the same corner where I had sat 4 nights ago, waiting for a motion sensor to tell me what I already suspected. Tonight there was no tablet, no camera feed, no sensor set to vibrate under my palm. The room was dark, except for the porch light bleeding through the curtains. The only thing I was waiting for was morning. I sat down and let the quiet settle the way it does after 11 on a November night along the coast. The furnace cycling on and off. The wind moving through bare branches outside the east-facing window. The particular silence of a house that has been lived in for decades, that knows the sound of itself so well that anything unfamiliar registers like a crack in the hull. I have never prepared for a difficult thing by talking myself through it. I prepare the way I always have, by sitting still and letting what matters come forward on its own. What came first was Maggie. Not Maggie the way I usually carry her. At the kitchen table, or standing in the doorway of Claire's old bedroom, with a look that said she already knew what I was about to say. This time it was Maggie in the hospital. The last 11 weeks. There was an afternoon near the end when the room was quiet, and the light through the window had the flat, pale quality that belongs to early spring in Maine, when the snow is gone, but the warmth has not arrived, and everything exists in the space between. She was holding my hand with less strength than she had the week before. She looked at me for a long time before she said it. "Do not let the boatyard be the only thing that keeps you steady, Frank." I had smiled. I thought she was talking about my hours. My habit of leaving before 5 and coming home after dark. My tendency to take calls during dinner and call it necessary. I thought she meant the business the way she sometimes pushed back on it. Gently. Consistently. Across 41 years. She was not talking about the business. I understand that now, sitting in the dark on a Sunday night in November, with 6.5 hours left before the most consequential morning of the last 4 decades. Maggie knew, the way she always knew things slightly before I was ready to hear them, that I had built Callahan Boatworks into something large enough to become a reason to keep people at arm's length. That a man who is always building has a convenient excuse for never just sitting with the people he built it for. She was not warning me about overwork. She was warning me that Claire needed a father more than she needed a company, and that if I confused the two, I would lose both. The second memory came slowly. The way the tide comes in. No rush, no force. Just the natural movement of something that has been waiting. Claire was 7 years old. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late October. I do not remember the year exactly, but I remember the temperature, which was in the low 40s, and I remember the route, which ran south along the coast from the boatyard to deliver a repaired depth finder to a lobsterman in Cundy's harbor. A short run, 3 hours at most. Maggie had a doctor's appointment. I could not cancel the delivery. Claire had asked to come. She sat in the bow of the workboat for the entire trip with a book on her lap and a thermos of hot cocoa and her jacket zipped to the chin. She did not complain once. She watched the water the way her mother watched people, with the kind of attention that does not announce itself but catches everything. I drove for 3 hours with my daughter in the bow and thought nothing about contracts or maintenance schedules or insurance filings. I thought, this is why I build. Not for the vessels. Not for the docks. For the fact that this child trusts me enough to sit in the bow of an open boat in October and believe the man at the wheel will bring her home safe. That child is 36 now. She runs the company I built. She married a man I welcomed into my home, into my business, into the room where I introduced him to every person whose livelihood depends on the decisions we make together. And that man spent 14 months constructing a legal mechanism designed to remove me from everything I spent 46 years building, using my daughter as the instrument because he understood she was the one thing I would never move against directly. Tomorrow, I am going to sit across a table from him and take apart what he built. Not because of the money. The money is recoverable. Not because of the legal mechanism. The conservatorship was never filed and will not be filed now. I am going to do it because of the 7-year-old in the bow of that workboat. Because what a father owes his daughter is the truth, even when she does not yet know she needs it. The clock on the mantel read 2:53. I looked at it for a moment. 4 nights ago, at exactly this hour, a motion sensor had vibrated against the dash of the Helen May, and I had lifted a tablet screen in the dark to find out who was moving through my boatyard. I had already known in the way you know things you are not ready to act on yet. But that was the moment the knowing became something I could not set aside. Now it was 2:53 on a different night, and Garrett Price was somewhere in Harpswell, most likely asleep, most likely satisfied, most likely reviewing in his mind the documents he believed gave him a position of strength. For the first time since I sat down, I felt something that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one. In 6 hours and 22 minutes, that position would collapse. I closed my eyes at 3. Not to sleep. A man who has been building boats since 1978 knows the difference between rest and sleep. One restores the body, the other restores the judgment. I needed the second kind. I needed to sit in the dark behind my own eyelids and let the morning come toward me at its own pace without reaching for it. The furnace cycled once. The wind moved through the branches. The house was quiet in the way it is when it has nothing left to ask of you. I let the morning come. Everything was in position. I arrived at the boatyard at 6:30. 2 hours and 45 minutes before the meeting. I wanted to know the room before anyone else walked into it. I had driven the Ford. Not the company truck. The Ford. It felt right to arrive in something that had been with me longer than most of the decisions I was about to unmake. The engine turned over on the first key the way it always does in cold weather. The heater took 4 minutes to reach temperature. The speedometer still reads 2 miles per hour optimistic at highway speed, a calibration error I identified in 1983 and have never corrected because at this point it would feel like changing something that does not need changing. The yard was already moving when I pulled through the gate. 3 dock hands running a trawler hull into the paint bay. Tom Wyatt's clipboard visible through the loading bay window. Monday morning at Callahan. Boatworks runs whether I am watching or not. That used to satisfy me more than it does now. 46 years of building something that does not need you to stand over it is supposed to feel like success. This morning, it just felt like time. I took the stairs to the second floor without stopping at the dock. The conference room at the top of the landing has 8 chairs. A long oak table that arrived in 1989, and windows that look out across the harbor toward the outer islands. I have sat at that table for budget reviews and contract negotiations, and twice for conversations that ended someone's employment with the company. I know every scratch on that surface. I know which chair wobbles at the back left leg. I know that the projector takes 8 minutes to warm and throws slightly left if you do not adjust the keystone. I turned on the projector. I checked the laptop connection. I arranged 6 document sets on the table face down, each one squared to the edge, each one placed at the chair it was meant for. I put Garrett's copy at the chair to my left, close enough that he would have to turn only slightly to look at me when he read it. Then I stood at the head of the table and looked at the room. The harbor was visible through the windows. Fog still sitting on the outer water, but burning off closer to shore. The dock below busy with the sounds of a Monday. Diesel engines. Pneumatic tools. The rhythmic knock of a hull being scraped clean. This was my room. I wanted it to say that before anyone sat down. The way a vessel says who built it, before anyone reads the name on the stern. I went down to the loading bay to find Tom. He was standing near Bay 2 with his clipboard, directing a crew repositioning a 40-foot sailboat hull on jack stands. "Stay at the conference room door after 9:10, I said. "No one in or out." He looked at me. His expression did not change. 28 years of reading my face had taught him the difference between a request and an instruction. "Nothing wrong," I said. "Just a meeting that needs to finish before it gets interrupted." Tom nodded once. He handed his clipboard to the nearest dockhand and followed me upstairs without asking another question. 28 years earns that kind of trust. In both directions. They arrived between 8:30 and 8:50 in the order we had agreed the night before. Vivienne came first, carrying her file box and a coffee she had picked up somewhere on Harbor Road. She set the box at her chair, sat down, and opened her laptop without a word. Vivienne Drake is not a woman who fills silence with conversation. That is one of the reasons I trusted her with this. Eleanor arrived 6 minutes later. Leather briefcase in hand. A gray blazer I had not seen before. She walked the length of the table once before sitting, the way a person does when they are reading a room they have entered for the first time. She stopped briefly at the window, looked out at the harbor, and said, "Good location." I did not respond. She did not need me to. Arthur and Owen came up the stairs together at 8:42. Arthur with his coffee thermos, and Owen with the medical folder that had not left his possession since Wednesday. Arthur looked around the room the way he looks at everything. Steadily, without performance. He sat in the chair 2 down from mine and set his thermos on the table. Owen took the seat beside the empty chair. The chair I had told Claire to sit in. At 9 I heard the dock crew below shift from setup to production. The sound changed. Heavier. More rhythmic. The boatyard settling into its Monday the way it has every Monday for 46 years. Claire arrived at 9:10. I had called her at 6:40 that morning. I kept it short. "Come to the boatyard at 9:10. Sit next to Owen. Do not speak to Garrett before the meeting starts." I had not explained. She had not asked me to. She came through the conference room door in a dark coat, her hair pulled back the way she wears it for early meetings. A travel mug in her left hand. She stopped 2 steps into the room and looked at the people in it. Vivienne's laptop. Eleanor's briefcase. Arthur's thermos. The 6 face-down document sets on the table. Then she looked at me. Standing at the head of it, her face changed. Not dramatically. Claire does not do things dramatically. That is something she inherited from her mother. But the color went out of it. And the professional composure she carries into every meeting. shifted into something quieter and more careful. She sat down next to Owen. She set her travel mug on the table and did not pick it up again. She did not ask what was happening. She already knew enough to understand that the answer was coming and that asking for it early would not make it arrive any softer. The clock on the wall above the projector screen read 9:13. The harbor outside the windows was beginning to clear. The fog pulling back toward the outer islands the way it does on November mornings when the sun finds enough strength to push through. Garrett came through the door at 9:15. Navy suit, gray tie, leather bag over one shoulder. The complete presentation of a man who has arrived to conduct business on his own terms. He pushed the door open with the ease of someone who has entered this room many times before, which he has, and scanned the faces at the table with the quick professional read of a lawyer taking inventory. He saw Vivienne. He knew her as a financial consultant. His expression registered nothing beyond mild acknowledgement. He saw Eleanor Marsh. I watched him place her. It took approximately 3 seconds. Former civil court judge. Retired. Elder law practice in Brunswick. The calculation moved across his face the way weather moves across open water. Visible, directional, and gone before you can name exactly what you saw. That was the first moment he understood that something in the room was not what he had expected. He looked at Claire. Claire was looking at the table. He looked at me. I was standing at the head of the table with both hands resting flat on the oak surface. Looking back at him. "Good morning, Garrett," I said. "Sit down." He sat. Not with the ease he had walked in with. He set his bag on the floor, pulled out the chair I had placed his documents set in front of, and lowered himself into it with the careful movement of a man who has just realized the floor beneath him may not be entirely solid. He looked at the face-down papers before him. He looked at the projector screen, which showed nothing yet, just the white light of a machine waiting for input. He looked at Claire. She did not look up. He looked at Arthur. Arthur was looking at the window. He looked at me. I nodded once at Eleanor. Eleanor reached forward and turned her own document set face up. She slid it to the center of the table with the deliberate motion of someone who has done this in a courtroom and is not in a hurry. She folded her hands. "Mr. Price," she said, "we have some things we would like you to look at." She pressed a key on the laptop. The projector threw the footage onto the wall screen at the far end of the table. The timestamp read 2:53 in the morning. The angle was wide. The side door of the boatyard loft, the interior stairs, the desk at the far wall beneath the window. The figure entered at 2:53 and 41 seconds. Dark jacket, knit cap, silver flashlight. He moved with the careful deliberation of a man who had thought through the space in advance. 14 minutes of footage. Eleanor played it without interruption. No narration, no pauses. Just the record. Garrett watched the screen, his face held. I have seen men hold their faces in difficult rooms before. It is a skill lawyers develop the way boatwrights develop the ability to read grain through repetition and necessity. But his hands were on the table in front of him, and at the 4-minute mark the fingers of his right hand drew inward. Slowly, like something tightening below the surface. When the footage ended, Garrett said, "That can be explained. Just like you can explain the nautical chart inside the Maritime Insurance Q3 envelope you took," I said. The room went still. Not the comfortable stillness of people waiting. The pressurized stillness of air before a storm breaks the surface of the water. Garrett stopped. The muscles along his jaw tightened, but no words came. He had rehearsed explanations for being discovered. He had not rehearsed an explanation for taking a decoy, for walking 14 minutes through a building, believing he was stealing leverage and leaving with a folded chart from last season inside a sealed envelope. Eleanor folded her hands. "Everything will be explained in a moment," she said. "Mr. Price, I suggest you listen to the full presentation before you speak again." Vivienne took over without being asked. She turned her laptop so the screen faced the center of the table and walked through the Atlantic Risk financial diagram the way she had walked me through it the week before. Methodically, without editorializing, letting the numbers carry the weight. 8 transfers. September 2022 through June 2023. Each one structured below the federal reporting threshold. H1 structured. H1 structured below the federal reporting threshold. Total, $290,000 drawn from the Callahan Boatworks Maritime Insurance Reserve account that Garrett administered as the estate attorney of record. The funds moved to Atlantic Risk Consulting, a Rhode Island limited liability company with a registered agent address in Providence. No physical office. No employees. No documented business activity of any kind beyond receiving wire transfers from a single source. Derek handles legitimate consulting work. Garrett began. Vivienne placed a single sheet on the table without looking at him. Rhode Island Secretary of State. Filing. Atlantic Risk Consulting. Date of formation. 2 months before the first transfer. Listed principal, Derek Price. No operating agreements on file. No state business license. No record of any engagement letter, deliverable, or contract with any party other than Callahan Boatworks. The room was quiet. Garrett looked at the sheet. He did not pick it up. He was not just taking money, Vivienne said. He was structuring, deliberately breaking transfers into amounts below the federal reporting threshold to avoid triggering a currency transaction report. That is a Title 31 violation. It carries its own penalties, independent of the underlying fraud. Owen opened his folder. He placed 2 documents side by side on the table. The altered medical assessment and Dr. Helen Sawyer's certified original, printed from her electronic record system with her office seal at the bottom of each page. He read the discrepancies aloud in the same voice he uses when explaining a diagnosis to a patient. Measured. Precise. Without inflection. Mocha score. Original, 28. Altered document, 18. Clinical notation. Original. Unremarkable, cognitive screening. No concerns identified. Altered document. Patient, demonstrated spatial temporal disorientation. Unable to correctly identify current month or recall recent appointments. Medication compliance. Original. Full adherence noted across all prescriptions. Altered document. Missed doses flagged across a 3-month period. Owen closed the folder. He looked at Garrett directly. You were not just trying to take his money, Garrett, he said. You were trying to take his mind. No one at the table spoke. Outside the conference room windows I could hear the boatyard, a backup alarm on a forklift, the low idle of a diesel engine warming at the dock, the ordinary sounds of a Monday morning at a company that had been running without interruption for 46 years. Those sounds had never felt as far away as they did in the next 10 seconds. Eleanor reached into her briefcase and placed the last folder on the table. Portland, 2016. A 76-year-old retired fishing captain. 18 months. 90% of his assets transferred through voluntary agreements, structured and administered by Garrett Price, then practicing maritime estate law in Cumberland County. The assets included 2 commercial vessels and waterfront property in South Portland. No criminal charges filed. Civil complaint settled under a confidentiality agreement. Garrett had left Portland the following year. He had met Claire in Harpswell 8 months after that. Vivienne said it. The way she says everything. As data. Not accusation. He did not stumble into your family, Frank. He chose it. Garrett looked at the folder. The color that had left his face when I mentioned the nautical chart did not return. For a long moment, he was very still. The kind of stillness that is not calm, but is its closest imitation. A man calculating the distance between where he stands and the nearest exit, and finding that every door in the room has already been closed. Drop the number 8 in the comments so I know you are still with me. A note: if that is not the journey you are looking for, it is okay to stop here. Garrett turned to Claire. His voice shifted lower, more personal. reaching for something that had worked before. Claire. He said her name, the way a man says a word he believes still belongs to him. You know I did this for us, for our future. Everything I have built has been for... Claire was looking at the table in front of her. She did not look up. She did not answer. The sentence finished in the air and stayed there. Unfinished. Unclaimed. The kind of silence that does not need to be filled because the absence of a response is the response. 3 minutes passed. I know because I was watching the clock on the wall above the projector screen. The same clock that has been in that room since 1991. 3 minutes in a room where 7 people are breathing and no one is speaking is longer than most people understand. It is long enough for the heating system to cycle on and off. Long enough for the tide outside the windows to shift the dock lines by a 1/4 inch. Long enough for a man to understand that the architecture of his entire position has been dismantled, and that every calculation he has made in the past 14 months has been based on information that was never real. Then Garrett said quietly, "What do you want?" It was not a question. It was a man calculating the floor beneath him, finding the lowest point he could stand on and still call it ground. I spoke for the first time since the meeting had begun. In the 8 minutes since I had said sit down, I had not said another word. I had let Eleanor lead. I had let Vivienne present. I had let Owen deliver the line that mattered most. That was deliberate. A man does not need to speak when the evidence speaks for him. But this part was mine. In this business, I said, one wrong measurement costs you the vessel. You can be right about everything else. Every joint, every plank, every fastener, every coat of sealant. And one wrong measurement undoes the whole build. I looked at him steadily. You were one wrong measurement, Garrett. In my world, that is enough. I slid the 3 documents across the table. The first, a repayment agreement for $290,000 structured over 18 months with interest, secured against his personal assets, and co-signed by Derek Price as a party to the original transfers. The second, a formal resignation from all advisory, fiduciary, and consulting roles connected to Callahan Boatworks, any Callahan family trust, or any legal instrument bearing my name. The third, a written commitment, notarized and witnessed, that no conservatorship petition bearing my name or referencing my assets would be filed in any jurisdiction by Garrett Price or any party acting at his direction. Sign all 3, I said. Walk out. We do not call the prosecutor. Garrett looked at the documents. I watched him move through it. The calculation, the inventory, the assessment of what signing would cost, weighed against what refusing would cost more. He was still a lawyer even now. Even in this room. Even with the nautical chart and the video and the financial diagram and the medical records and Portland spread across the table in front of him like the wreckage of a vessel that had finally broken apart. He understood the structure of what was in front of him. He picked up the pen. He signed the first document, then the second, then the third. He set the pen down on the table and released a slow, controlled breath, the kind a man releases when he has accepted the terms of something he cannot change and has decided that the only remaining act available to him is to stop fighting it. He began to push back his chair. That was when Claire reached into her bag. She placed a sealed envelope on the table in front of him. Standard legal size. White. No markings on the outside. No expression on her face. Not anger. Not grief. Not the particular devastation of a woman saying goodbye to 10 years. Her face was the flat, clear surface of a decision already made and no longer available for negotiation. That is from my attorney, she said. Eleanor prepared it. I signed it this morning. Her voice was steady. The way a beam is steady when it has been properly set. Not because it feels nothing. Because it was built to hold. Garrett looked at the envelope. He looked at Claire. In 83 minutes of that room, through video footage and financial diagrams and altered medical records and a 7-year-old case file from another state, Garrett Price had not been without a response. He was a man who had spent his career understanding that every problem has a structure and that every structure has a door. He had always found the door. In every room. In every situation. He had no response for this. For the first time since he walked through the conference room door at 9:15, Garrett Price had nothing to say. The room was very quiet. Outside the windows I could hear the boatyard. Engines idling at the dock. The knock of a mallet on a hull fitting. The low call of one dock hand to another across the yard. The sounds of a company that had been running since before Garrett Price had known my daughter's name. 46 years of that sound. Through every hard winter, every market contraction, every morning, I was not sure the next contract would come and went down to the yard anyway because the boats do not build themselves and the people who build them deserve a man at the top who shows up whether he feels like it or not. I had never been as glad to hear those sounds as I was at that moment. Garrett left the room at 10:40. He did not say goodbye. He did not look back. He picked up his leather bag from the floor beside his chair, pushed back from the table, and walked to the door with the measured pace of a man who understands that the only remaining form of dignity available to him is not running. The door closed behind him. Tom's footsteps followed down the stairs. Not escorting, just present. The way a man with 28 years in a building knows when to be visible without being asked. The latch clicked. The room held its breath for a moment. Then Vivienne reached for the nearest document set and began organizing the files with the quiet efficiency of someone for whom the work is never quite finished. She stacked the Atlantic risk flow diagram on top of the Portland folder, squared the edges, and closed her file box with a soft snap. She would spend the next 3 days writing the formal investigative report that Eleanor would attach to the court filing. She knew that. She was already thinking about it. Eleanor stood. "We will file the signed agreements with the court by end of day," she said. "Derek Price's cooperation has been confirmed. His attorney reached out this morning. The $290,000 should be recoverable within 30 days. Possibly sooner if the structured repayment triggers the acceleration clause." I nodded. She extended her hand and I shook it. The handshake of two people who have done something difficult together and do not need to make more of it than it was. "Call me if anything changes," she said. Then she picked up her briefcase and left. Arthur was the last of the others to stand. He came around the table slowly and put his hand on my shoulder for exactly the length of time it needed to be there. He did not say anything. Arthur has always understood that some moments are not improved by language. He squeezed once. Then he was gone. Owen looked at me from across the table. His coat already half on, the medical folder in his hand. "Dad," he said. "Are you all right? Give me a few minutes alone with your sister." The room emptied slowly. Vivienne closed her laptop and tucked the signed documents into a reinforced envelope. She nodded once in my direction, then walked out through the side door without a word. Eleanor followed, pausing long enough to rest her hand on the oak table, her fingertips pressing against the grain like she was testing whether the surface could hold the weight of what had just happened. Arthur rose from his chair, looked at me the way only a brother can, and left with Owen. I heard Owen's voice in the stairwell, low and steady, asking Arthur something I could not make out. Then the door at the bottom of the stairs closed, and it was quiet. Claire sat 3 chairs away from me. She had not moved since placing the envelope on the table. Her hands were flat on her lap, palms down, the way Maggie used to sit when she was thinking about something she did not want to say out loud. The harbor light came through the window behind her and caught the edge of her hair, turning it copper for just a moment before the clouds shifted and the room went gray again. I did not speak first. I had planned to. I had rehearsed sentences in my head for 3 days, turning them over the way I turn a piece of white oak on the lathe, shaving off a word here, adding one there, trying to find the shape that would hold. But now that the room was empty and the documents were signed and Garrett's footsteps had faded down the gravel path, none of those sentences felt right. They were too precise, too controlled, like something Eleanor would draft, Not something a father would say to his daughter after watching her marriage collapse on a Monday morning in a boatyard conference room. Claire spoke first. She did not look at me. She looked at the window, at the harbor, at the fog that had begun to lift over the outer islands. How long did you know? 3 months, I said. Since July. She nodded. Not the kind of nod that means agreement. The kind that means the answer. Confirmed something she had already suspected, but hoped was wrong. Why didn't you tell me? That was the question I had feared most. Not because I did not have an answer, but because every answer I had made me sound like a man who did not trust his own daughter. And maybe that was partly true. Maybe I had spent so many years building things with my hands that I forgot the most important structures are the ones you build with words, spoken early, spoken honestly, even when they are difficult to hear. I did not have proof, I said. I had suspicion. And suspicion without evidence is just noise. I was not going to bring noise into your life. She turned her head then. Her eyes were dry but red at the edges, the way eyes look when someone has been holding back tears for hours, and the effort has left marks. She looked at me the way she looked at me when she was 11 years old, and I told her that her dog, a rust-colored retriever named Captain, had been hit by a truck on Route 24. She had not cried then either. She had just looked at me, waiting for me to say something that would make the world make sense again. I could not make the world make sense. I never could. Maggie was the one who could do that. Maggie could sit with Claire on the porch and talk for an hour about nothing and everything. And by the end of it, Claire would stand up and walk back into her life like the ground beneath her was solid again. I never had that gift. I had hands that could shape a hull from a raw plank. I had eyes that could read a tide chart from memory. But I did not have the words. He was going to take everything, Claire said. Not a question. A statement. She had heard Eleanor's summary. She had seen the financial diagram. She had watched the 14-minute video on the laptop screen while sitting 4 feet from the man who had filmed himself inside her father's office at 2:53 in the morning. Yes, I said. He was. She looked down at her hands. She turned her wedding ring once, then twice, then slid it off her finger and placed it on the oak table. The sound it made was small, a thin gold circle on old wood. It barely made a noise at all, but I heard it the way you hear a hull crack underwater. You do not hear the sound itself. You hear what it means. I signed the papers this morning, she said. Before I came here, I sat in Eleanor's office at 7:15, and I signed them. I did not hesitate. I know, I said. Do you know why? I shook my head. She looked at me then, with an expression I had not seen before. Not anger, not grief. Something quieter, something that lived beneath both of those things, in the place where a person decides what they are willing to lose and what they are not. Because you watched him for 14 minutes, she said. And you did not call the police. You called Arthur. You called Vivienne. You called Eleanor. You built a case the way you build a boat, one plank at a time. And you did it to protect me. She paused. The harbor fog had lifted enough that I could see the mast of the Helen May through the window, swaying gently on the incoming tide. 5 words, Dad. I waited. You did not give up. I felt something move in my chest. Not pain, not relief. Something older than both. Something that had been sitting in the same place since the night Maggie died, waiting for a reason to shift. Claire stood up. She walked around the table, slowly, trailing her fingers along the edge of the oak, the way she used to trail her hand along the gunwale of the workboat when she was 7 years old, riding to Cundy's harbor on a cold October morning. She reached me and put her arms around my shoulders. She held on the way a person holds on to something they almost lost. I put my hand on the back of her head, the way I did when she was small. Her hair smelled like salt air and coffee. Your mother would have been proud of you, I said. She would have been proud of you too, Claire whispered. We stayed like that for a long time. The harbor sounds came through the window. A gull called. A line creaked against a cleat. Somewhere below us, Tom was walking the gravel path, making sure Garrett's car was gone. I did not count the minutes. Some moments are not meant to be measured. They are meant to be held carefully. The way you hold a compass that once belonged to someone you loved, knowing it will always point towards something true. The days after the confrontation moved, the way tides move when the wind dies, slowly, without urgency, but always forward. Eleanor filed the 3 signed documents with the Cumberland County Clerk's office on Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, Vivienne had submitted a formal financial summary to the FinCEN field office in Boston, documenting the 8 structured transfers totaling $290,000 from Callahan Boatworks Insurance Reserve account into Atlantic Risk Consulting. She included Derek Price's name, the Rhode Island registration records, the Cayman Islands wire confirmations, and a detailed timeline cross-referenced against Garrett's advisory calendar. The referral was not a criminal charge. It was a match held near dry wood, and Vivienne knew exactly how close to hold it. Owen called me Thursday evening. Dr. Alan Whitfield's office in New Hampshire had received the Maine Medical Board inquiry. Whitfield's attorney responded within 4 hours, which told me everything I needed to know. Innocent men do not retain counsel before lunch on a Thursday. Owen said the board investigator had already requested Whitfield's billing records and appointment logs for the previous 18 months. The $16,000 payment would surface. It was only a matter of sequence. Claire moved into the guest bedroom of our Harpswell house on Wednesday. She brought 2 suitcases, a box of Maisie's books, and a look on her face that I recognized from years of watching new apprentices walk into the boatyard for the first time. Fear wrapped in determination, held together by the belief that showing up is the hardest part. She was wrong about that. Showing up is the second hardest part. The hardest part is staying. But she stayed. Maisie arrived with her mother, carrying a backpack shaped like a whale and a stuffed gray seal she called Barnacle. She was 8 years old and understood more than anyone gave her credit for. Children are like that. They read the weather before adults even look at the sky. On Friday morning, I sat with Claire at the kitchen table while Maisie ate cereal in the living room, cross-legged on the floor, watching a nature documentary about humpback whales. Claire told me she had known something was wrong for months but could not name it. She described the feeling as living inside a house where someone had moved the furniture 2 inches to the left. Everything looked the same. Nothing felt right. She asked me what would happen to the boatyard. I told her it would survive. I told her Callahan Boatworks had weathered a recession in 1983, a fire in 1991, and the loss of 3 vessels in the ice storm of 1998. It had weathered Maggie's death. It would weather this. She asked me what would happen to her. I did not have an answer for that, not because I did not believe she would be fine, but because I knew that the kind of fine she needed was not the kind I could build with my hands. It was the kind that comes from inside. Slowly, the way a cracked timber heals when you clamp it right and give it time. On Saturday, something small happened that turned out not to be small at all. Maisie had been sitting in the upstairs study, the room I used to share with Maggie for evening reading. She had pulled a book from the lower shelf, a hardcover collection of Maine lighthouse photographs that Maggie bought at a yard sale in 2009. Inside the book, pressed flat between pages 46 and 47, Maisie found a folded piece of paper. She brought it to me in the kitchen, holding it with both hands the way children hold things they sense are important but do not understand. "Grandpa." This was in the lighthouse book. I unfolded it. The paper was torn along one edge, roughly, as if someone had ripped it from a larger sheet in a hurry. It was half of a printed email. The header was partially visible. The date read March 14th, 2023. The sender line was cut off, but the recipient field showed Garrett's firm email address. The body of the message contained 3 lines. The first line read, "Conservatorship filing timeline adjusted to Q4. Medical documentation will be finalized by Whitfield before September." The second line read, "Coastal asset restructuring target remains Callahan Boatworks and associated dock titles." The third line was incomplete, torn at the fold. Derek confirms Cayman account is. The rest was gone. I held the paper for a long time. The kitchen was quiet, except for the sound of the nature documentary in the next room and the low hum of the refrigerator. I turned the page over. On the back, in pencil, in handwriting I recognized immediately, were 4 words, Maggie's handwriting. Thin, slanted slightly to the right. The way she always wrote when she was sitting in bed with a book on her knees. Frank needs to know. I set the paper on the counter. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. But something inside me shifted, in the same way the keel shifts when a wave hits broadside. Not enough to capsize. Enough to remind you that the water is deeper than you think. Maggie had found this page. She had found it before she died. She had hidden it inside a book she knew I would never open on my own, but that someone, someday, might pull from the shelf. She had written 4 words on the back because she did not have time, or strength, or perhaps the heart, to say them out loud. She had known about Garrett. Not everything, but enough. I picked up the phone and called Owen. He answered on the first ring, the way he always does when my number appears. I need you to come to the house, I said. Is everything all right? Your mother left us something. There was silence on the line. Not the silence of confusion. The silence of a man who understands that some things arrive late, but never too late. I will be there in 40 minutes, he said. I hung up and looked at the torn page on the counter. Outside the window, the harbor was calm. The fog had cleared for the first time in days, and I could see all the way to the outer islands, past the mooring field, past the channel marker, to the place where the bay opens into the Atlantic. Maisie appeared in the doorway, Barnacle, the stuffed seal, tucked under one arm. Grandpa, was that from Grandma? I looked at her. 8 years old. Whale backpack. Cereal crumbs on her shirt. Eyes that missed nothing. Yes, I said, it was. Is it important? I folded the paper carefully and placed it inside the wooden compass box on the counter, beside Maggie's grandfather's compass. The brass latch clicked shut with the same sound it had made every time I closed it for the past 46 years. It is the most important thing in this house, I said. Maisie nodded, satisfied, and walked back to her documentary. The sound of whale song drifted through the doorway, low and ancient, filling the kitchen the way the tide fills a cove when no one is watching. I sat down at the table and waited for Owen. The compass box sat in front of me, holding a brass instrument that always points north and a torn piece of paper that proved my wife had been watching over me long after I thought she had stopped. Some things you build with your hands. Some things you build with time. And some things are built for you, by people who loved you enough to leave a light on in a room they knew you would eventually enter. A year passed. Not the way years pass when you are young, in a rush of noise and ambition and the belief that time is something you own. This year passed the way water passes over stone. Slowly, quietly, wearing down the sharp edges until what remains is smooth enough to hold. It is November again. 2024. I am 73 years old. I am sitting on the dock behind Callahan Boat Works, on the same bench Arthur and I built from reclaimed white oak in 1994, the year Claire learned to tie a bowline knot. The harbor is steel gray this morning, and the air smells the way it always smells in November on the Maine coast. Salt and cold and the faintest trace of wood smoke from somewhere up the hill. The boatyard is still here. 47 years now. The sign out front has been repainted, the letters sharper than they have been in a decade. Claire ordered that in March. She said a business should look like someone cares about it. And she was right. Claire took over daily operations in January. She walked into my office on a Tuesday morning, set a cup of coffee on my desk, and said she wanted to run this place the way I built it. I said yes before she finished the sentence. She was 37 years old and had spent 2 months learning every system in the building, from the payroll software Tom swore was broken to the lumber inventory Arthur kept in a notebook he refused to digitize. Tom told me in April that she caught a billing discrepancy on a cedar shipment before it hit the books. He said it with the kind of pride a man reserves for someone he has watched grow up. The divorce was finalized in August. Claire signed the papers in Eleanor's office on a Wednesday afternoon, came home, made dinner for Maisie, and read to her until she fell asleep. That night I found Claire on the back porch in one of Maggie's old sweaters, looking at the harbor. I sat beside her. We did not speak. Sometimes the most important conversations happen in silence, between people who trust each other enough to let the quiet do the work. Garrett left Maine in June, relocated to a firm in Virginia. I do not know more than that, and I do not ask. Eleanor told me he fulfilled the repayment agreement in full. $290,000 returned in 7 transfers over 5 months, the last one clearing on the 29th of October. The money is back in the insurance reserve account, where it belongs. It sits there now the way ballast sits in the hold of a vessel. You do not see it. But without it, nothing stays level. Derek Price dissolved Atlantic Risk Consulting in April, 3 weeks after Vivienne's referral reached the FinCEN field office in Boston. The Cayman account was frozen in February. Vivienne told me the federal investigation is active but slow, built on paper and patience rather than speed. Dr. Alan Whitfield surrendered his medical license in May. The board investigation confirmed the falsified cognitive assessment, the altered score, the fabricated clinical notes. $16,000 for a lie that could have cost me my name, my business, and my right to make decisions about my own life. Owen comes to dinner every Sunday. He drives down from Portland, parks in the same spot, and walks through the kitchen door without knocking. He checks my blood pressure every visit. Not because I need it, but because it is his way of saying he is paying attention. Arthur still comes to the boatyard 3 mornings a week. He drinks coffee in the loft, reads the marine forecast, and watches the apprentices work. He turned 70 in September. I gave him a bottle of scotch and a new tide chart. He gave me a look that said both were unnecessary and both were appreciated. Maisie is 9 now. She comes to the boatyard after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays, drops her whale backpack in the corner of the loft, and does her homework at the same desk. Garrett searched at 2:53 in the morning 1 year ago. She does not know that. She only knows it is the desk with the best view of the harbor. Last Tuesday, she asked me what a keel is. I told her it is the backbone of a boat, the first piece you lay down, the one that everything else is built upon. She thought about that for a moment, chewing her pencil the way Claire used to do. So if the keel is wrong, the whole boat is wrong? She said. Yes, I said. She nodded and went back to her math. I watched her for a moment. This small person with her mother's eyes and her grandmother's handwriting, already beginning to understand things that take most people a lifetime to learn. The torn email is still inside the compass box. I have not moved it. Owen read it the night he came to the house, held it for a long time, and set it back without a word. Maggie had seen the current before any of us felt it. She was too sick to stop it, but she left a marker, a bearing, a light in a window she knew someone would eventually look through. I think about her every day, not with sadness anymore, with gratitude, the kind that lives in ordinary things, in the compass on the counter, in the thermostat, set to 70 degrees, in the dried sea lavender on her nightstand, brittle now but still holding its color the way some things hold their color long after you expect them to fade. This morning I walked to the dock before anyone arrived. The fog was thin, more gauze than wool, and through it, I could see the Helen May rocking at her mooring. 32 feet of white oak and cedar, built in 1981. She is old now. Her paint needs touching up. Her engine runs rough on cold mornings. But her hull is sound. Her keel is true. And she has never once let me down. A truck pulled into the gravel lot behind me. I knew the sound. Claire's white pickup. The door opened and closed. Footsteps on the dock. She stood beside me, coffee in both hands, and held one out without a word. We stood together, father and daughter, watching the fog lift off Casco Bay. Somewhere beneath us, the tide was coming in, filling the cove the way it always does, patient and unhurried, carrying everything the sea had gathered during the night. I took a sip. Hot and strong, the way Maggie used to make it. "Good morning, Dad," Claire said. "Good morning," I said, and it was.